There we go. All right, and I know some people log on unable to have their video on, but it does animate the environment as best as you can keep your video on. And this is so helpful because I'm still learning people's names, and this is the ultimate cheat code. So if your name is not right, like Galaxy A20E, I don't think that's your name. If you know how to manipulate it to put your name there, that would be helpful. All right, so the topic, who remembers the topic? Who could summarize the topic from are you here because of the beautiful topic description, or did you just want to hang out on a Monday night? You can unmute if you want to answer that question. We don't accept Zoom shyness. I will start calling people out in 5, 4. Juliana.
Both.
So what do you remember from the description?
It was going to be looking at the various ways of describing different phases or different types of learning.
Yes, absolutely. So especially as we get started today, we're going to focus on this acronym Pardes and what it represents in terms of different kinds of exegesis, which is a fancy word for how you learn things from a text, how you interpret from a text. Does anyone remember anything else from the description?
Orchards. Sounds like food.
You thought there was going to be food served at this event. Unfortunately, this is one of those rare Jewish events with no food, unless someone brought something for all of us. Yes, so Pardes is also just the normal Hebrew word for orchard. And I don't think in this session, but in future sessions, we'll also look at the most famous story about a Pardes, about an orchard, in which, and I'll just tease it with suspense one more time, 4 rabbis enter the Pardes, and only one emerges whole. But that's probably going to stay in the suspense mode. So hold on just one second. Sorry, welcome people here. Okay, and I also wanted to also go with this first title for a shiur because there's an institution in Jerusalem called Pardes, which was formative in my own Jewish learning and development. So I'm happy to plug it a little bit. But before many of you don't know my route to the rabbinate yet, but it was not a childhood dream. It was something that kind of slowly percolated in my early 20s. And when I was peaked on the idea, but not at all convinced of it, I went to study at a institution in Jerusalem called Pardes, which is a co-ed yeshiva, very traditional and very modern and open-minded, and to do a full year of study there, a gajillion hours a day. I didn't have Hebrew skills really at the time, and so advancing with that and really studying in an orchard of learning. And that's really what Pardes represents in Jewish tradition, is how much we can put ourselves into this place of learning. We can do it through different modalities of learning, which we're going to look at today. The rabbinic story seems to be about mystical study and what kind of what experience you might have going into the orchard of mystical study. And then in my own life, attending this yeshiva Pardes was my first time being fully immersed in Jewish study. So that's kind of how this all fit together for me. And let's see, are we ready to dive in? think we are. Well, actually, I'll do one more prelude. If a few people could unmute or write in the chat, what are like ways of Jewish study that you're familiar with or that you've experienced? What are different ways people approach study, different types of classes you've heard of or participated in? Yeah. Ari Moshe, do you want to tell us what chavruta is?
In my experience personally with chavruta, it is two people engaging in a text. And the way that I've practiced it is that we each come with a question and a possible answer that we've come to while reading the text. And the answer is somewhere in the conversation. And so people can have a chavruta partner that they meet with regularly for a long period of time, and they kind of grow together as they study together.
Great. Yeah, I like a lot of that. Studying a text together, people might bring different questions, different answers, possible answers, and that ideally it's a long-term relationship, so that way you get to kind of guide each other's learning and have a reciprocal process. And also, one thing that the rabbis say, and one thing that we'll see in the study of mysticism in particular, is there's an idea, chavruta o mituta, which is three Aramaic words, which means studying with a learning partner, friend, a chavruta, or death. Chavruta or death. And this is a rabbinical warning that a lot of deep study on one's own can be dangerous. You kind of need another person to bounce ideas off of. Wait, I'm not sure you're interpreting that correctly, or wait, you're spending so much time on this topic. What about all the other things that we could explore? So there's this warning, chavruta o mituta. All right, what other modes of study would you classify as Jewish study? And it could also be a manner of study that you use in other subjects or other parts of life. But what would you call a Jewish framework or type of study? Another one. I bet Bettina has an answer. I bet Scott has an answer. I think Yaakov and Sophie have an answer. Don't be shy.
I can start off if you want to.
Super.
I'm thinking of the shiurim. I really enjoyed in the community at Ochadash.
The
When we
what?
were sitting around the table at the kiddush,
Mhm.
or also in the prayers room in the synagogue itself. That's a very Jewish setting because everyone is discussing and everyone has a different opinion, a different view. So yeah, I would say that's very Jewish.
Yeah, so having a source sheet or something and then seeing how different people react to it and mixing it with food or mixing it with prayer, that all makes sense. Karen, I saw you unmute.
Yes. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Yes, what we did is we did have a Musar course last year, the year before. Several of us were in there. And within this Musar course, we also had a Chevruta. So every other week we met, the two of us. It was always paired. And we discussed what we had read and studied, firstly in the group and secondly by ourselves. And we exchanged what we had read and thought. Yeah, that's what.
Yes.
Okay.
Great. So the particular mode of Musar, which has a subject focus around kind of character development, but also has its own kind of mode of learning and rhythm of learning. And then I saw Juliana said listening to drashot, listening to sermons, right? And that can sometimes appear as a more passive form of learning. But as the rabbi, I know that sometimes people come up to me right afterwards and they weren't passive at all. They have some things to say. Scott.
Yeah, I don't know what the rabbis say about this, but learning by doing, whether it's tikkun olam, with other people doing projects or
Mhm.
work that we've done in the Chevra, work in the Neighbors Program, where you're working with other Jewish community members and you're sort of figuring it out as you go, as you do things.
Yeah, great. Yeah, some of our holidays, I'd say some of the holidays have a special focus on learning by doing and participating, like Sukkot comes to mind in particular, where some of the actions of Sukkot teach us the message. Okay, that is great. It's a great start. And I'm going to share my screen now with the blessing for Torah study, which everyone can say behind their mute button. Another aspect of Jewish study is that it is kind of framing it as a sacred experience, not just, I'm just going to read the newspaper, but saying this, which can be a sacred experience, Eric, of course. But to label this as a sacred moment, the study we're going to do, this is important. And then also that studies should be sweet and nourishing. So I hope that's the case. All right, so you can join me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who hallows us with mitzvot, commanding us to engage with words of Torah. Now, raise your hand, physical hand, or digital, if you know what Sepharia is, if you've discovered Sepharia in your Jewish learning. All right. Seeing about half the hands, or a third. I'll do a longer, I'll do a longer kind of intro to Sepharia, but I want to mention it because I'm going to use it as a tool right now, and it's quite an amazing resource. So I'll give a quick primer on Sepharia and explain why I'm doing so. And also just a disclaimer, this shiur will be in English. I did not prepare multilingually, but if you want to make a comment in German, I think there's a few people on the call who will be able to translate as needed. Okay, so Sepharia is essentially the best website for Jewish text online, and sepharia.org. The name is a pun on the word sefer, which means book, or sifriya, which means library, and Sepharia is like a safari into Jewish text, or something like that. And what's nearly every Jewish text one could think of has been uploaded here, and new translations all the time. But and even just in the last 2 weeks, the Reform Movement's women's Torah commentary was uploaded to Sepharia, which is really awesome. And there's German translations and so forth and so on. But you can go to any text you want, either by category or searching, want to look at the Passover Haggadah or whatever. If we jump to this week's Torah portion using this handy dandy button, and if the internet works, okay. So we see the verses in Hebrew and English. You can change that to Hebrew and German, or just English, or just Hebrew, etc. But what is the real power of this resource is not that you can access the text, but if you click on any text in its system, like this verse, it then gives you all other texts that are connected to this text. So are there traditional commentaries about this verse? Are there Talmudic references to this verse? Is there midrashim, stories that expand on this verse? Is there halakha? Is there laws that expanded on this verse? And also to point out, sheet means that anyone create a source sheet based on this verse. And that can be really fun to look into because you can see what topics And some people make really thoughtful, well put together source sheets, but you never know what you find. Quality varies. Anyway, if you click commentary, then you see the name of famous commentators. For traditional Torah commentary, it's mostly medieval rabbis, and it's a list of essentially only men, which is why one of the reasons why it's great that the women's Torah commentary is now part of this system. But this is the tradition we've inherited of Parshanut, of Torah commentary, and more voices need to be added in our day. But if you click on Rashi, who most people have heard of, usually get something better than that. Come on, Rashi. There. Okay. You get a comment on this verse. And I didn't prepare to go to this verse, so we'll just see what it is. Sometimes commentaries are offensive, sometimes they make no sense, sometimes they're answering the exact question you have. So the verse we have here, the opening verse of the chapter of this portion, Jacob lived 17 years in the land of Egypt, so that the span of Jacob's life came to 147 years. And Rashi, originally writing in Hebrew, but thankfully here we have it in English. He says, based on these opening words, Jacob lived, why is this section totally closed? Because, comprising as it does an account of the death of Jacob, as soon as our father Jacob departed this life, the hearts and eyes of Israel were closed. Their eyes became dim and their hearts troubled, because of the misery of the bondage which they began to impose upon them. Typical in rabbinic literature, there's a lot of who are they talking about and what question is trying to be answered and who's the they, and it can be, we'd have to study more. Another reason is because he, Jacob, wished to reveal to his sons the date of the end of days, when Israel's exile would finally end, but the vision was closed and concealed from him. Okay, we're not even going to fully try to understand what this commentary is, but we're just going to notice that there's two comments. He has this first comment, and then he says another reason why this verse, why this section is closed, and so forth. And so often when the tool I'm going to hopefully give us today is when I see a commentary, traditional, or even if we're sitting around a table and someone says, I think that this verse means blah, 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 it's helpful to know kind of what lens are they studying this passage from. Are they looking for the literal meaning? Are they looking for the historical, scientific meaning of this verse? Are they trying to apply it to their life today? It's kind of good to know kind of on what level am I studying this text? Otherwise, people can talk past each other sometimes. One person is trying to unpack a metaphor and the other person thinks the metaphor is real. That's what, there is a tiger at the door. No, I think it was a metaphor that the fear was upon them. Okay, and if you don't say, well, we're studying in different ways here, it can be hard to proceed. So that's the problem, is what kind of commentary am I looking at? And now we're going to start to see a traditional solution, which many of these commentators reference and say, right now I am talking in this way. So we're going to go into the orchard. Okay, everyone feeling more relaxed. We see the green unfold in front of us. Eric is going to get to pick apples in the month of January, and we're feeling good. As I'm going, please interrupt either by chat or unmuting with the occasional question or as needed or comments. Okay, so as we said, Pardes means orchard. And we'll look through this source sheet together, which actually was created by Sefaria itself, which usually means it's a pretty good source sheet. There's no wackiness in it. because some source sheets are made with unusual perspectives, which is okay, but Safari is probably going to give us a good, well-organized source sheet. So that way I'm not talking all the time. Could someone unmute, please, to read this paragraph? Don't be shy. And Ari says, Ari Moshe says, can I put a link in the chat? I can. Hold on one second. I hear a voice, but very quietly.
I'm not sure if I can make it louder.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yes, I can hear you better now. Go for it, please.
Is it enough to read?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I'll try to shout a bit. Have you heard of the Pardes? Coming from an ancient Persian word for an enclosed garden, the Hebrew word Pardes means orchard. The English word paradise comes to us from the same source. It can also refer to the unique method of Jewish biblical explanation and interpretation set out in the following acronym Pshat, the contextually plain meaning of the text. Remez, we often, okay, I can't pronounce that one properly, allegorical, thank you, hinting towards deeper and hidden meanings. Drash, the interpretive layer used to teach moral and legal lessons. Pshat, the secret and mystical meanings meant to reveal the nature of God.
Great. You can pause there. Thank you. So this is what we're studying. We're studying this acronym Pardes, which I would add for the Austrian audience here, that of course another important word comes from this Persian word Pardes, which is the word tomato, as in paradiso. So Pardes is this acronym meaning Pshat, Remez, Drash, and Sod. And these are four. We can, after we study this, we'll see, wait, there's more layers, or we'll see if one expands this acronym. But traditionally, there's four layers of interpretation. Pshat, which is the simple meaning of the text. Okay? It's not necessarily the literal meaning of the text, because as I said, if someone says, there's a tiger waiting at my door, and what they mean is I'm afraid, then the simple meaning of the text is the person's afraid. So sometimes people confuse simple with literal. Simple means just what's the normal. If most people would agree, the intended meaning of this text is blank. And of course, people disagree what the intended meaning of a text would be. But in a Pshat analysis, we also get just helpful explanations, like if there's an obscure name of a town in Egypt, then a Pshat explanation would be to say this is being referred to, Pitom Ramses, which was a city on the southern bank of the Nile, or whatever. So Pshat is just kind of a simple meaning of the text. Remez is an interpretation where this text is actually hinting at something else. Okay, we'll look at that in detail. Drash, we know this word, Juliana used it earlier, drashot. Drash means to like interpret and pull out of the text, which all of these do to some extent. But the way it's used here is when someone teaches through the text that's being studied. Okay, and some people will say this is the meaning of the text, and some people will say, since we're studying this text, this is what this means to me. But either way, Drash is kind of a bigger lesson that can be learned from the text we're studying, and it's a similar word to midrash, which can refer to a few things also in different centuries of rabbinic life, but often midrash are stories that expand upon the simple Torah narrative. For example, that Abraham smashed the idols in his father's shop is not in the Torah. It's a midrash, an expansion on it's kind of rabbinic fan fiction on the Torah. That's midrash, which often is drash, but not necessarily. And lastly, sod is the secret or mystical meaning of a text. So a text could be very simple, apparently. The Mishkan is supposed to be 20 cubits tall, but then in certain mystical groups, they'll say that this 20 cubits actually represents the unfolding of the this and the that, and then I'll get confused, not remember anything, and have very little sod to teach all of you. So sod is these mystical secrets that some people are very passionate about, the Kabbalistic mystical sod side of things, and your humble rabbi doesn't have too much sod yet in his mind, but we'll encounter it. Okay, I'll keep going here with this introduction. Many believe that every verse of the Torah can be interpreted along each of these layers, so that each verse contains multitudes of meaning. As you, George, you, Miriam, you, Doris, as you study the text of the Torah, keep in mind that every verse can be and has been interpreted according to each of these layers and many more. You can love and appreciate all of them, or you can decide that just one is really for you. There are commentators who prefer rationalist readings and ones who prefer mystical. There are ones who like to mix in as many as possible, and many who stick with what they know best. See for yourself with these famous verses, the first in the Torah. Okay, so we're going to start looking at the first verse of Genesis, and we'll get examples of these four layers. But before I do, I'll take a moment to pause. Any comments, questions, thoughts, confusions, etc. All right, people are on the edge of their seat. Do not fall over. We're going to read the first verse of Genesis. Okay, so here we have, and another thing, of course, translation, another layer. Translation is a layer, right? When you're translating something, you're already interpreting it especially in complex verses like the first ones of Genesis. So another useful thing about Sefaria, once you get good with it, is it's very easy to rotate through different translations, which can help provide, help get you closer to the different options of interpretation in the words themselves. Here are the first two verses. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz, ve'ha'aretz hayta tohu vavohu, ve'choshech al pnei tehom, ve'ruach Elohim merachefet al pnei hamayim. And one possible translation, when God, we normally think in the beginning. In German, what's the default translation of Bereshit? Anyone know just how that first word is usually most often translated?
Am Anfang.
Am Anfang?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, yeah. So here we see in the English already something different than the default one. The default might come from the King James Bible. Who knows? I don't know. But here it says, when God began to create heaven and earth, the earth, it's kind of a parentheses, at that time, the earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God sweeping over the water. And every one of these, this is one of the most interpreted verses. Every one of these words could be translated in multiple ways, but we'll just take this one initial translation. When God began to create heaven and earth, the earth was unformed and void, empty, with darkness over the surface of the deep and a wind from God sweeping over the water. We're going to start with a Pshat interpretation from the Rashbam, a medieval commentator, I'm pretty sure the grandson of Rashi, who looks at the narrative context of the verses and explains it the way that makes the most sense according to that context. Okay, he's going to read the next few verses to himself and then suppose what's the simple meaning of this verse. For what if you had thought that this world had always existed just as you see it now, full of all good things? It wasn't so, but rather, that's why it needs to be written, when God began to create, that is to say that these verses explain in the beginning of the creation of the heavens and the earth, or that is to say at the time when the upper heavens and the earth had already been created, whether it was a long time ago or a short time ago, then the earth was already created, unformed and void, that there was nothing in it. His language is a little, well, maybe for German speakers, it's no big deal to have long sentences with many commas and subordinate clauses, but this isn't the best English. But anyway, I think the simple comment he's saying is the pshat of these verses is that the Torah starts as the earth is actually, it's not just emptiness. The earth already exists. It's just that the earth is somehow empty and void. But there's already been something's already been created. Sorry. Okay. Some might say that's not the simple meaning of the text. What are you talking about? But that's his simple contextual meaning. He's not teaching you a life lesson about it. He's not going too far into the mystical vocabulary. That's the simple meaning. Okay. As it says here, the Rashbam is simply answering the question, what do these verses mean? What is the point of these verses? His answer makes maybe perfect sense within the narrative of the creation story. It's a pshat layer of interpretation. In other words, these verses exist to explain that while we might have assumed that the world always existed as we saw it, in reality, there was a time before all the things on earth had been created. Okay. So yeah, sometimes you read the pshat and you say, well, duh, and that's good. Not in this case, I'd say, but sometimes you say, well, duh, of course, a stone means a stone, and that's good. That means the pshat is really pshat. We all can agree on the simple contextual meaning. If someone interprets and says the stone is really God's nose, then you have to wonder what exactly is going on here. Okay, but if a stone is a stone, then we're in the land of pshat. Okay, but now we're going to another medieval commentator, the Da'at Zakenim, and see what he says in the level of Remez. So Pardes, P-R-D-S, we're now at the letter R, Remez, which means in modern Hebrew, Remez is a hint or a clue. So now, how does this verse hint or clue at something? The word Bereshit has 6 letters. Bet, Resh, Aleph, Shin, Yud, Taf. He's correct, 6. Corresponding to the 6 days of work. In that verse, there are 7 words. Let's double check his work. Bereshit, bara Elohim, et hashamayim, ve'et ha'aretz. In the Hebrew, he is correct. There's 7 words in that first verse. The verse, 7 words, corresponds to the days of the week. And there are 28 letters in this first verse corresponding to the 28 days of the month. And in this verse, there are 6 alephs, the letter aleph, which corresponds to the 6,000 years of this world that will unfold before the Messianic age, as aleph has an implication of 1,000. Okay, so I'd say we stretch into the mystical here, but we're seeing this as a Remez form of commentary, which often plays with numbers or plays with words or says, this verse has this kind of obscure word. There's another verse that has this kind of obscure word. we're supposed to connect the two. Okay, so this verse is hinting at that verse, or the numbers of this verse hint to something, or as you can see, the presence of a certain letter. Okay, so that is Remez. If people know the term gematria, which is, so in Hebrew, every letter can have a number associated with. Aleph is bet, Aleph is 1, bet is 2, Yud is 10, Kaf is 20, etc. So gematria is when you look at the numerical value of one word and learn something from it, or for people who don't like gematria, make up something about it. So that's gematria is kind of also in this Remez land. And it says here, what made the above commentary count as Remez? Two attributes of the commentary are common in the Remez level of interpretation. Allegory, that something in the text represents something else entirely. In this case, these words and letters stand in for the entire cycle of time set into place at creation. Or number two, interpretation drawn from subunits of the text, such as letters. While any layer of interpretation comes from the meaning of words, Remez often uses hints that come from the letters themselves, divorced from the meanings of the words they create. Okay. So another potential form of Remez, I don't have an example on me, but if you look in a Torah scroll and you see the little crowns of letters, some would tell you it's just an aesthetic ornament to have extra strokes above certain letters to make the text more beautiful. But some would say, no, the way those have been placed, that they're hinting at some other meaning. So that would be another form of Remez. Okay, so we have Pshat, the simple contextual meaning, and we have Remez, something is hinting at something else. And Remez, often in translation, you'd never have a chance, okay? None of the Remezes, none of those hints, if we just looked at when God began to create heaven and earth, we have no way of doing that same interpretation because we don't know how many Alephs there were, the letters are different, etc. Comments or questions about Pshat or Remez before we go to Drash and Sod? Five, four, three, two, one, 0. Okay, we'll keep going. All right, we are ready for Drash. So now we're hearing from Rashi. And he says, in the beginning, Bereshit, Rabbi Yitzchak said that the Torah, which is the law book of Israel, should have commenced with the verse Exodus chapter 12, verse 2. This month shall be unto you the first of the month, which is the first commandment given to the people of Israel. What is the reason then that it commences with the account of the creation? Okay, so Rabbi Isaac, I believe it's a Talmudic quote that he's drawing on, says, isn't the point of the Torah to give the Jewish people law? If it is, then why do we get this whole book of Genesis with families fighting and the creation of the universe? Who cares about that stuff? Let's just get to the law. So we should have started Exodus chapter 12, verse 2, when it's given over the law that the Jewish people need to mark the first of the month. Okay. And Rashi gives us an answer. One thing to know about Rashi is he sometimes tells you who he's quoting, but sometimes he tells you a tradition that many people have said for 1,000 years before he lived, and he just gives it to you as his favorite answer, but he doesn't necessarily say, I'm repeating someone else's comment. Anyway, because of, what is the reason then that our Torah begins with the account of creation? because of the thought expressed in the text. Now, he's using a proof text, which means taking another biblical passage to prove your point. God declared to God's people the strength of God's works, in order that God might give them the heritage of the nation. Okay, this is a verse in Psalms. 4. Should the people of the world say to Israel, you are robbers, because you took by force the lands of the 7 nations of Canaan, Israel may reply to them, all the earth belongs to the Holy One, blessed be God. God created it and gave it to whom God pleased. When God willed, God gave it to them, and when God willed, God took it from them and gave it to us. Okay, so the Drash here is teaching a whole lesson about how Israel biblically came to be the home of the Jews after being the home of the Canaanites, and that if the Torah had started just with the story of the Jewish people, then it wouldn't be as applicable to all nations. But the Torah starting with the creation of the universe, the creation of Adam, the creation of the first generations of humanity, this, Rashi is saying, is to teach us that it has something to say to all peoples, not just to the people of Israel. Okay, we can disagree with his interpretation. We can think it's connected to modern Zionism. It's not connected to modern Zionism. Those are all good conversations to have. But that's what Rashi's doing, is Drash, teaching some lesson that he wants to teach to his community, or he thinks the people of his generation need to learn, and using this source to offer Drash. So, right, if we look back at that verse again, when God began to create heaven and earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God sweeping over the water. Nothing explicitly in that verse is about that this is a book about Jewish law or the law for the Israelites. Nothing in that verse is about the land of Israel. Nothing in that verse is about the Canaanites. Nothing in that verse is about the relationship between humanity and God. So it's really from Rashi's mind, or for some previous rabbi's mind, that they pulled out of the text a lesson that they wanted to teach. Okay, and of course, if anyone's ever given a sermon, sometimes you approach a text, just with a completely blank, open mind, and you just start reading the text, and something in the text says, okay, that's interesting, let me talk about that. And sometimes all week long, you've been stewing on environmental concerns because something happened, a law changed, or a natural disaster, or whatever it is. And so it doesn't matter if the verse is about the laws of so many things would be easy to do. It doesn't matter if the verse is about Joseph's Technicolor Dreamcoat. I'm going to find a way to pull out of that verse a lesson that I want to say about the environment. Okay, we're going to run out of the inks that made this multicolored coat if we don't take this seriously, and that's what this verse has come to tell us. Okay, so Drash really can bring us to a lesson that is also, like Remez, something kind of far away from the text itself. But that's what keeps these words alive. So that is Drash. Okay, and our Sefaria narrator. Let's have another reader just to have another voice come into the room. Anybody else want to unmute to read the Drash?
I can read it.
Please do.
What makes this Drash? Drash can be difficult to categorize. At its base, it takes the text and turns it into a lesson, a story, or a legal example. Here we can see Rashi has something he wants to teach through the text, namely that the Torah starts with the story of creation, not because it was the first thing to happen narratively, So why does it start with creation? Because the Torah wants to make a point about the nature of the world, that all that is created belongs to God, and God can deal with it as God wants. Should I continue with the sod part that the
Sure.
paragraph goes into?
Sure.
Lastly, we have the level of sod, or the secret reading of the text. Generally, this involves the hidden names of God embedded in the text. In this case, those hidden names show how creation is dependent on the mystical emanations of God.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Ari Moshe.
You're welcome.
So Drash, Drash is usually the interpreter wanting to teach something through the text. It doesn't mean that the text, it doesn't mean they're sometimes it doesn't mean they don't have legitimacy in making that interpretation. It doesn't mean that at all. But it means that different people will come to that text and find different things to say about it. And they could be very, very different. And as you know, we chant the same Torah portions every year, and somehow different things are being said. So lastly, sod, the secret meaning of the text, which sometimes is within a certain school of Kabbalistic and mystical interpretation, such as focus on God's hidden names or special names, and so forth. So, or Ne'erab, I don't know this commentator, says that the divine attribute of Gvura, strength, strictness, and judgment, is associated or has the 42-letter name, which comes out of the verses from in the beginning to the bet in Vohu, or Bohu, which is 42 letters. They constitute 7 names according to the 7 sefirot. Okay, this is all in the Kabbalistic vocabulary. Sefirot are different emanations of God. God is one, but kind of flows forth in different emanations, and one of them is Gvura, strength, strictness, and judgment. But if we go back to the verses themselves, here's the word vohu, which means emptiness or void. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 42 letters to get from the beginning to that bet or vet. And on the secret mystical level, that is a name of God that's 42 letters long, and within it contains 7 other mystical names of the sefirot. Okay.
Can I ask you a question?
You can ask for sure.
So these examples, the example of Remez and Sod, I can't really see the difference in them. They both seem to be very mystical in calling on meanings of letters in or numbers and things like that. Can you maybe expand on the difference between those two, or give a different explanation of them so they're not as similar of examples?
Yes. I'd say let's look at the sod for just another moment, and then I'll try to tease them apart. Okay, so the above text separates the words from any direct narrative meaning. Instead, it explores the letters themselves to find the hidden names of God living in the verses. As each name is related to a specific sort of manifestation of the divine, mystics believe that studying the sod allows us glimpses into the nature of God, nature of the divine. And I think there are other examples of sod that are not just focused on letters in God's name. And Ramban, with an N, Nachmanides, the Spanish commentator, his comments can be really useful because he'll be talking about Pshat, Remez, or Drash. He won't specify necessarily. And then after like a nice couple paragraphs of explanation that's very helpful and very comprehensible, he'll say, and the sod, and speaking in a mystical way. And then he'll say something that I've never comprehended and I don't spend time. Okay, but I appreciate that he shows you when he's making that switch, and I haven't dug deep enough into this avenue to ever comprehend and get something from the Sod, so I tend to walk away from it. But what's interesting with these different rabbis is that they show how each person has different sides to them. Some of them can be super nitpicky on the grammar and tell you the exact form of the Hebrew word of the grammar and the 3 other times that word appears with the same grammar, and just give you a very strict analysis. And then not without any remez, this means this, just straight up, what is it? And then all of a sudden, jumping off, they go into their mystical vocabulary. So I'd say in terms of Remez versus Sod, I'd say Remez takes less time to digest, okay? The word, first of all, we're talking about I can resonate with this interpretation. We're talking about the creation of the world. Not so surprising that there might be a hidden message, a clued message about the creation of time itself. So there's like it's fitting within the category a bit of what's being discussed. There's some context that prompts this. And Bereshit is 6 letters. What's the most 6th thing in Judaism? Okay, the 6 days of the week, especially when it comes to creation, since it says that God created the world in 6 days. So that's why it's 6. But the verse has 7, etc., etc. So Remez usually is more digestible and could be kind of an interesting observation, whereas Sod, you kind of usually need someone to explain how the Sod fits into a bigger mystical concept.
May I make one more short comment about the
Sure.
Remez and stuff? So I actually first learned about Pardes from a secular reading group that I was in. That was so we learned about it from someone who is Jewish. So, but she adapted it to be more secular because they were reading a secular book. And for Remez, what they chose to do was they chose to trace one of the words in the sentence back through the entire book or series and see whether that gave you any more meaning. So they would follow the word dream back and see when dreams appear throughout the story and see if that gave them more. And then with Sod, one definition that I really liked that helped with my secular readings with Pardes was something that's shaken loose by all these different readings of the text. So as you go through all the steps, what's an extra meaning for you that's been shaken loose? And that helps for people who are not at that level, who can find a real secret, but maybe another something has been shaken loose.
I like that. So by spending enough time to go through Pshat, Remez, and Drash, maybe some neurons fire, connect to something, and you can offer something else shaken loose. Do you still have the source, or what?
I do still have the source. I can send it to you. Yeah.
That'd be great. Great.
Could I ask something, please?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So I'm not sure, but we're not supposed to understand it that Sod is the highest level of interpretation, right? It's not like moving through levels, all these levels of interpretation, and Sod is like the crown interpretation or something.
I agree with you. I don't think that's the intention, because the Pshat can be super important, right? If it's about, this is the law. Well, I want to know what is the law. I don't really care if the law connects me. I mean, some people would say, I don't need to know in this moment that the law connects me to God's attribute of loving kindness, or that it hints at how many days there are in the week. I have to build a sukkah. Where do I find what materials are allowed to be in the sukkah? Give me a simple interpretation that helps me get there. So I agree with you. It's not do this, do this, do this, do this. And it's also not, yeah. And I'd say that the two most common modes are Pshat and Drash, I'd say. Most people spend most of their time, what is the contextual meaning that the text kind of intends? And then Drash kind of, how does it speak to me? Or how did it speak to someone else?
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Other comments or questions as we've seen the 4 letters? Karen.
Yes. I'm kind of stuck with what you first said about the Pshat, about the first verse.
Yes.
In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. And then I think it was Rashi, or I can't remember. The first interpretation was that the Pshat interpretation was that heaven and earth had already been there before. Is that correct? So they were there when before God. Did I mean?
So I wouldn't say so.
I've
Okay,
heard that before, and I don't see it.
Okay.
I just don't see it. For me, it seems that God was there at the beginning, and everything else happened later.
Yes. So I don't think that's what's being nuanced here. The nuance is, when does the Torah begin?
Yes.
Is the Torah begin with, there was emptiness in the world? Not even in the world. There was emptiness, and then God created the heavens and the earth.
Yes.
Which I think is how most people think that this verse means. There was nothing. Oh, well, there was God, but let's say there's nothing physical in the world, and then God creates heaven and earth. But what Rashbam is pointing out is the word Bereshit. The word Bereshit does not actually mean in the beginning.
Okay.
It means in the beginning of.
Okay.
Essentially. So it's saying in the beginning of God's creating the heaven and the earth. Okay. So that nuanced difference of what Bereshit, that word, means, implies that it's not in the very beginning of existence.
Okay.
But in the beginning of God's creating the heaven and the earth.
Okay.
So you'll see Jewish commentators explain it the way that you initially understood.
Okay.
Or according to this Rashbam.
Okay.
So
that's how basic. So yes, thank you. So it's really the basics, right? You can even talk hours about the basics. I was wondering, because everyone seems to be so all right with that, and I just couldn't understand it. But then it's okay. I think it's a matter of knowing Hebrew. Right?
In that case, yes. And
okay.
I want to see if I have another example, because also this chapter 1 verse 1 is not the easiest verse to understand what is its simple meaning, for sure. So let me see if I have another example of a Pshat explanation. As I look for that, if anyone else has a comment or question.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Is there anything which I've been trying to decipher in what we've just read that defines the word days, the length. I mean, it was not a 24-hour day back then. It could have been millions of years. So is there anything in the verses that we just read, Bereshit, that, okay, in English we say day and we associate it with a 24-hour day, which is what we're familiar with.
Doesn't that come later?
There are, in the commentaries we looked at, there's nothing clarifying that. What does a day mean? But that is a subject that's addressed in other commentaries that we could find. I'm not sure exactly which ones, but of course the sun and the moon, the sun doesn't seem to be created until a few days down the line. And so how could you have a normal Earth day until there's a sun? So yes, we need to define our terms a bit more, and some commentaries will look into that. Okay, I'm sure I'm not finding a quick, perfect, simple example of Pshat, which is funny because it's supposed to be the simple one. But as we study other texts, I think we'll find that. So now, to make sure this concept can stick with us, we're gonna play a little game of sorts. Okay, I'm putting in the chat summary of the 4 types. Either in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so another way of saying it, Pshat. I don't like literal, I prefer simple. What is the simple meaning of the text? Remez, hint or allegory. What hidden idea or symbol does this text suggest? Drash, homiletic. What lesson, moral, or story can we derive from this text? And sod, secret or mystical. What deep spiritual or mystical insight might this text reveal? Okay, I'm going to give everyone 5 minutes on their own to interpret a text I'm going to put in the chat. Maybe take notes or type on another program. Don't share anything into the chat yet, but see if you can interpret this text on a few of these levels. And you can be playful with your interpretation. You don't have to truly believe that's the best interpretation, but just to play with these types. Okay, and this is a very important text with deep meaning, and it hints at something, and you can tell a lesson from it, and it has mystical teachings in it. So let's all try our hand at interpreting this text. Okay, mit ein Tuchus kann man nicht tanzen auf 2 Hasanas. With one behind, you can't dance at 2 weddings. Okay, so spend a few minutes on your own. What is the simple meaning of this text? What is the hidden idea or symbol of the numbers or letters of this text? What lesson should we derive from this text? If you were going to give a 10-minute sermon, you can't just say this line, you have to expand on it. And what is the deep spiritual or mystical insight behind this text? It's okay if you can't interpret it on all 4 levels, but spend a few minutes trying to stretch your interpretive muscles.
Can you put that up on the screen again, Rabbi?
If you click chat at the bottom of your screen, if you click chat, it's the last 2 comments in the chat. Give me a thumbs up if you find it, Miriam. Otherwise, I'll screen share it also. Okay, I'll screen share it in just a few seconds. 1 second. Okay. Okay, with 1 tuchus, a person cannot dance to it. Spend a few minutes interpreting this. Don't put anything in the chat yet. I will ask you to in a moment, but first let people think it through on their own. One more minute and then we'll come back together. Okay. All right. So we'll see how our Pardes, how we come at this with this Pardes tool. Could anyone unmute, or you can copy and paste into the chat what your Pshat, simple meaning of this text is? And people might say, if someone says something the same as yours, you can still unmute. It'd be interesting to hear if people are coming up with the same simple meaning, or whether there's a diversity of simple, obvious interpretation. Juliana.
So each person has just one rear end, which means it equals 1 person. And 1 person can't be in 2 places at the same time.
Okay, thank you. Laura says the straightforward meaning of the phrase can be practical. It is impossible to physically be in 2 places at once. It emphasizes the limitations of human capability, reminding us to focus on one task or commitment at a time to avoid overextending ourselves. I would say that first sentence after the colon was pshati, but then we got kind of drashy. We kind of went into Drash land. That's good. Okay, good to see. I like where that went. Anyone else have a pshat to offer?
Can I throw
Miriam?
one in?
Yeah.
I kind of read a little bit of envy into it, like you should be more satisfied with what you have and not be envious of what somebody else has, to try to have everything at once, something like that.
Okay, yeah. With one behind, you can dance at one wedding. That's
Yeah.
great. That's great. Who needs 2? Okay, great. Let's hear Remez. Was there anything that this
Another
text?
Pshat. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, yeah. Go for it.
Okay. Well, usually on a wedding, you sit on a stool. You sit on a chair, and you have another saying. It says you can't sit on 2 chairs at the same time. Well, some people can, but usually you sit in between and you drop. you fall.
Okay.
So there's an empty space and have no support. Well, that's what, it's also very literal, I guess, I think.
Well, I actually hear in that could be a bit of a remez, because you're saying
Okay.
that this phrase is actually hinting at another phrase that uses similar starting point.
Okay.
So could be Pshat, could be Remez, and I think we could also Drash with it. Anyone have any other remezes? They could be a little out there, maybe. Yeah.
I have a
Ari
bit.
Moshe.
Yeah, I have a bit of a remez. You can't enjoy one thing if you're trying to enjoy two things at the same time. You have to, especially if they're mutually exclusive, like two different weddings. Like if your head is somewhere else, you're not going to be able to enjoy any one of them.
Okay.
Isn't
Okay,
that
great.
all Drash? I mean, most of these sound to me like they're offering a life lesson.
My Drash tends to expand on my Remez usually. So my Drash talks about being aware of your abilities, your limitations, your strengths, and making the choice so that you can be present with the one thing. So I expand on my Remez to go into a longer Drash.
Okay. Yeah, and Remez usually has like the more direct hint. So one thing you did was say that this one behind two weddings is actually hinting at enjoying one thing versus enjoying two distinct things. Scott, did you want to contribute a remez? Did you have one?
No, I was just very literal with Pshat. I just said you can't do two things at once. But for me, every other interpretation was a Drash.
Okay.
Yeah, you can't be happy trying to do two things at the same time. To me, sounds like a moral to live by.
Okay. Anyone have something they want to put forward? I think this is Remez. I really think this is squarely in Remez.
Yeah, I think we all make decisions and we go through one door and then many other doors close at the same time. And we have to live with that fact that one decision is like killing other options as well.
Okay. So if I want to make that more Remez-y, because I think Scott was about to chime in that still sounds Drashy. The Remez could be.
It has to come from the text, doesn't it? There has to be something in the text that it's coming from.
Well,
No.
Let's look at the English one. Here, behind is actually not referring to a part of our body. It refers to the door that we just passed through. Okay, that's what the hint is.
Okay.
And so if you pass through one door, you can't be passing through another door. That's why you can't be at two weddings. Okay, that's a little bit more directly Remez, kind of using either word or number connections in a more literal or explicit way. Okay, let's go into Drash. We've already heard some that are maybe could be Drash, but who would like to? Jakob, Sophie, yeah.
About Remez, maybe just to stick to the meaning of the words, you don't dance with your bum. So I just realized that like dance with your feet. So it's an interesting, unless we are really like thinking about the lifting of the chairs. And then I think if we are thinking about the lifting of the chairs, then it has this like additional layer of, are we talking about a bride or a groom? So are we talking about cheating in a way here? I don't know.
Okay, great. So that was interesting to focus on why is it tuchus instead of fus. And so that is a hint that we're talking about the bride and groom specifically, or the bride and groom's parents, or whatever. Okay, that I like that as a remez. All right, let's move into Drash. What life lessons did you learn, or do you want to teach because of this text?
I think I have kind of one. I don't know. Okay, so I put focus on doing one thing at a time, or you could end up in trouble. And my idea was you're trying to speed between one wedding and the next. You know, you're going to get in trouble for speeding. Right, now just slow down and focus on one thing at a time, you know. Yes,
Okay.
literal, but yeah.
Great. Yeah. And another, interesting about your Drash is not that it's about that it's a physical impossibility, but that it's just might lead to risky behavior as you rush to be in multiple places at once, or
Yeah.
almost at once.
Yeah.
Juliana, you have to unmute, please. Juliana.
Sorry, mine is very similar, but I wrote it, you shouldn't split your energy and time. You should focus fully on what it is you are doing.
Great. Thank you. And then Leslie, I saw your thumb go up. Was that the I agree with that comment, or did you want to make your own?
I would like to make one.
You speak to.
Sorry, Leslie, and then Eric. Leslie?
Yeah, no, I had a completely, somewhat different interpretation. If Drash if Drash has components which relate to teachings or morals of life, then I view this as saying that the man or woman with the tuchus is the guest, and not turning up at the wedding is going to disappoint someone. So don't overcommit yourself, because you're going to disappoint someone, right?
Great. Wonderful. Thank you, Leslie. Eric, and then Anne. Eric.
Well, maybe in a more also political way, you have to make a decision. Either you're on one side or on the other side. Either you are with us or against us, and don't try to be in the middle.
Okay, yeah, you
Don't
couldn't go
here.
Yeah, so I'm blanking on one of them. In Romeo and Juliet, it's the Montagues,
The Capulets and the
Capulets and
Montagues.
Montague, yes.
Okay, so there, you couldn't dance at those two weddings, not because they took place at the same time, but because it would be a political affiliation issue. You got to choose. Okay, Anne.
Yeah, I wanted to say something similar. It's I think the weddings, it's all kind of loyalty. When you dance at one wedding, then you can dance at two weddings at the same time. It doesn't say that you can't, but not if you just have one behind. So either you have to move constantly between two doors, or something really bad will happen to you. You will grow a second behind, and that's not good. So
that's another, right. The solution to this could be, instead of the solution being let's have just one wedding focus, another solution would be to have two behinds. Okay.
Yeah. But for me, it's the main focus is, like Eric said, it's about loyalty.
Okay, interesting. Scott.
Yeah, I think it's, to me, what struck me is that this is about wedding. So you're happy when you're dancing, right? So to me, not doing two things at the same time leads to a happier life, or you're not going to be happy doing two things. If we leave the interpretation open to anything, that you shouldn't be doing two things at the same time, or politically you have to be with us or against us. I mean, obviously the world of interpretation can be artificially large or enormously large. But to me, the wedding piece made it tied to satisfaction in life or happiness or something like that.
Yeah. So I think Scott and others have brought up an important part of interpretation, which is, are there things that you can hang that strengthen the tie of your interpretation to the text? Okay. It's especially important. It's probably important at all levels, but in Pshat, you can't just make up a new definition of a word. If that word's appeared 10 other times in the Torah, your definition of that word needs to make sense in all those spots. But also with the Drash, if you can take more things from this verse into account, like it's not just about with one thing, you can't be at two things. but it's with one body part, you can't be at two places. Or, okay, what kind of places? Joyful places. So I like how Scott, how you tried to incorporate as much of the verse as you could into your interpretation. Okay, with our last couple minutes, did anyone derive a mystical secret from this verse? Is God's name hidden in here? Is a mystical practice hidden within this verse? Anyone have a mystical interpretation? So
I don't
go
know
for it.
mystical, but I think kind of the idea of wedding or being wedded or committing oneself could lead to the idea of you have one belief or you have one faith where you're not kind of torn between different beliefs or something. You're wedded, in a sense, to that which you believe in.
Okay.
It's one wedding or whatever it is. Yeah. That's how I saw it.
So it's about mystical union with the one God. Clearly.
Yeah, but I mean the word Tokus is in there, so I wouldn't want to put too much mysticism on there, but yeah, it would be an attempt, yeah. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And Sophie.
This might be a really dumb one, but maybe you could say the wedding is between God and the people of Israel. So, and then you can kind of take a meaning of you shouldn't, I don't know, something about Götzendienst? Something about like worshiping other gods or something like that.
Yeah, okay, great. And we see, yeah, I like that focus. We also could have, there's other midrashim connecting Shabbat and the Jewish people in a marriage. So maybe there's a mystical meaning here that you can't be in two Shabbats at once. You can only be in one Shabbat at once, or so. Okay, any final, now I like Arimer said, does anything shake loose over these across the 4 levels? Does anyone have a new interpretation bubbling to the surface and they really want to offer it before we reach our conclusion?
I really liked what was said about commitment and how we only have one behind, we only have one life. You have one life, you can't do it all, so commit to the choices that you make. And I wanted to keep the dancing in there and dance through life if we're gonna stay topical.
Great, great. I like that. Okay, well, I think, let's just say it again. Pshat, simple contextual. Remez, what hints or clues are being alluded to? Drash, if I was going to offer a drash on Friday night, I was going to stand up there and give a sermon. What kind of life lesson would I pull out of this, or legal lesson? And Sod, is there a mystical interpretation of this text? When we meet next time, we'll pull up a couple other verses and see some interpretations and refresh whether is this commentator speaking at the Pshat level, Remez, Drash, or Sod. But it's also something you can practice any Shabbat, you know, when if someone's saying something about that portion, are they just trying to explain that denial, divide, whatever? Are they just trying to explain it, or are they going into one of these other levels? And then eventually, like I told you, we're going to get to the 4 rabbis who entered the Pardes. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And if everyone could unmute to say good evening to each other. I think we're all in European time zones, but maybe sometimes we'll have, oh no, Juliana, are you still in the
Nope,
States?
I'm back. I came back 2 days ago.
Okay, so we don't have to say good morning to you, or everyone can say good evening or good night.
Thank you, Rabbi. This was wonderful.
Good night.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Rabbi.
Thank you.
Good evening to everyone.
Yeah,
Bye.
thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Laila tov, Laila tov.
See you next time.
Thank
Is
you.
it-
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you very
Will it
much.
always be the
One.
Thank
first
you. I
Monday?
really enjoyed
Yes,
it.
it'll always be the first Monday until it's not. But yes,
Okay.
always the first Monday. Second Mondays are
The readings.
the Lesen Stunde. Third Mondays are a discussion group at the synagogue in person only. I don't know why I just turned purple. And the fourth Monday is board meetings.
The one at the synagogue is the one that you commit to regularly, right? You have to go to each one.
No,
I don't think so.
no,
Oh,
no.
I thought it was you have to commit to all of them to go.
No, if the topic
Okay.
doesn't, if the topic
Then
doesn't
I'd love
interest you,
information on what this is so that I can potentially go sometimes.
Yeah, I want to go too.
we'll continue to send out communications about it.
Thank you. Because
Absolutely.
I was under the impression you had to commit to it regularly. That's why I didn't ask for more
Right.
information on it.
No.
Yeah.
I love the meeting on Zoom, by the way. My
That's
daughter
also
loves the meeting
excellent.
on Zoom. I'm really happy with it. So,
Mhm.
2 thumbs up for a Zoom option. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Especially now in the cold winter months, right?
For sure. For sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Everyone, good night.
Bye.
Good
Bye,
night.
bye.
Bye.
Thanks.